What's up, you guys? Welcome to the very first episode of the Darkly Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Alex Kern, and thank you so much for being here. If you've ever found yourself deep in a 2 a.m. Google spiral or Reddit thread about a case that just doesn't add up, you're in the right place. Because every week we dig into real stories that are bizarre, chilling, and a little too real for comfort. I release new episodes every Monday, so if you like what you hear, following the show or sharing it will really help keep it going. And just so you know, some of the stories I cover can get pretty dark, so listener discretion is always advised. Tonight, we're starting with a case that has been picked apart for over a decade and still leaves people with more questions than answers. And this one, well, it's stuck with me for a very long time. In 2013, Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old student from Canada, set out on a solo trip through California. She was posting photos, writing about her thoughts, doing what a lot of us would do when we're trying to feel more like ourselves. On January 26th, she checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She never checked out. 19 days later, hotel staff found her body in one of the rooftop water tanks, a place guests should never be able to reach. The investigation ruled it an accidental drowning, and maybe that would have been enough if the details didn't keep piling up. No one knows how she got to the roof. No one saw her go. There were no signs of trauma, no drugs in her system. And then there's the elevator footage. You've probably seen it. Elisa's alone, pressing buttons, stepping in and out, moving like she's scared or confused or being followed by something we can't see. People have picked this case apart for years, but at the center of it is a young woman who didn't deserve to become a mystery, and a hotel with a history it still can't seem to shake. This is the story of Elisa Lam and the haunting mystery of the Cecil Hotel. Now, before we get into the details of Elisa's final days, it's important to understand the place where it all happened, because the Cecil isn't just some random hotel in downtown LA. It has a long, complicated past that has shaped how people responded to her case. The Cecil Hotel opened in 1927, right in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. At the time, it was considered modern, stylish, the kind of place that promised a comfortable stay and a growing city. But the image didn't hold up for long. A few years later, the Great Depression hit and the city around the Cecil began to change. Businesses closed, people moved out, and downtown started to shift. And the hotel quietly shifted with it. By the 1950s, Skid Row was just blocks away. Thousands of people, many unhoused, struggling with addiction or mental illness, were living nearby. The Cecil had become a place that catered less to tourists and more to long-term renters and those with nowhere else to go. The LAPD was called to the hotel pretty often. Overdoses, assaults, people who vanished. As time went on, the incidents continued to stack up. Locals started calling it something else, the Suicide Hotel. And it stuck. Because the deaths that happened there weren't just tragic, they were frequent. People jumping from windows, disappearing, being found in their rooms under circumstances no one could really explain. Whatever the Cecil had started as, by the middle of the century, it had become something entirely different. And it wasn't just the frequency of what was happening there, it was the way those stories started to stack up one after another, year after year. The first documented death at the Cecil happened in 1931. A man named Percy Ormond Cook died by suicide after trying and failing to reconnect with his wife and child. Over the next few years, similar stories followed. In 1934, an Army sergeant named Lewis Borden also died by suicide. And in 1937, Grace E. Magro fell from the 9th-story window. Her body hit telephone wires on the way down. Some said she jumped, others weren't so sure. Either way, it was another death at the Cecil, and people were starting to notice the pattern. In 1944, a 19-year-old named Dorothy Jean Purcell was staying at the hotel with her much older boyfriend. She woke up one night in pain, not realizing she was in labor, and gave birth alone in the bathroom. Believing the baby was stillborn, she panicked and dropped the infant out the window. Dorothy was arrested and charged with murder and later found not guilty by reason of insanity. It's another tragic story, and like so many connected to the Cecil, it's one that's hard to make sense of and even harder to forget. By the 1960s, these kinds of headlines had become more common. In 1962, a woman named Pauline Otten jumped from the 9th floor after an argument with her husband. She landed on a man walking below, killing them both instantly. 2 years later, another guest, Goldie Osgood, known locally for feeding pigeons in Pershing Square, was found murdered in her room. She'd been strangled and assaulted. Her room was completely torn apart and her killer was never found. By then, the Cecil wasn't just a hotel with a dark past, it was known for it, and somehow it still wasn't done making headlines. Now, in the 1980s, Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, reportedly stayed at the Cecil while carrying out a series of brutal attacks across Los Angeles. He'd break into homes, assault and murder his victims, then come back to the hotel like nothing ever happened. Some say he even walked through the lobby of the hotel in blood-stained clothes. But at the Cecil, that didn't exactly stand out. Now, a decade later, another man checked in, Jack Unterweger, a journalist from Austria who had gained fame for turning his life around after serving time for murder. He came to LA to report on crime, but while staying at the Cecil, he was committing more of it. His victims were women, most of them sex workers. He strangled them with their own bras. Later, he admitted he chose the Cecil on purpose because Richard Ramirez had once stayed there. Now, there's something deeply unsettling about that because it's not just that bad things happened at the hotel, it's that some people seemed drawn to it because of that. So the Cecil's reputation got so dark and was so widely known that eventually it made its way into pop culture. In 2015, the anthology series American Horror Story Hotel pulled directly from the hotel's history for its setting. The show's fictional Hotel Cortez was filled with ghosts, violence, and a constant sense that something was deeply off. The nods to real life weren't exactly subtle. Just like the Cecil, the Cortez had a haunted past, an unsettling guest list, and a way of pulling people in. Even the serial killer parallels were clear, characters inspired by Richard Ramirez and others who walked the halls in real life. It was fiction, but for anyone who knew the true stories behind the Cecil, it didn't feel all that far from the truth. By the 2010s, the Cecil wasn't just known, it was infamous, the kind of place that made people uneasy. So the new owners tried something different. They rebranded part of the building as the Stay on Main, a cheaper, more modern option aimed at young travelers. The rooms got a facelift, the walls were repainted, and the overall feel was more casual, hostile than horror landmark. But the structure was the same. The layout hadn't changed. The same elevators took guests upstairs, where some rooms were still occupied by long-term residents. People who'd seen a very different side of the hotel. Even with the new name and fresh paint, the strange stories didn't stop. Guests talked about flickering lights, odd sounds, and that feeling you get when you know someone's watching even if no one's there. So no, the rebrand didn't take, and in 2013, the Cecil's history caught up with it again. When Elisa Lam checked in, she had no idea what the hotel had been or what it still was, but within days, her case would become one of the most chilling and widely debated mysteries of the modern era. Elisa Lam was born on April 30th, 1991 in Vancouver, Canada to David and Yina Lam, immigrants from Hong Kong who owned a local restaurant where she helped out. She was curious, creative, thoughtful, someone who loved books, fashion, travel, and who often used writing to process how she felt about the world around her. Elisa also lived with bipolar disorder and depression. She was open about both on her Tumblr blog, Nouvelle Nouveau, where she shared her thoughts honestly, like someone trying to make sense of how she felt. She was managing her conditions with a combination of medications, an antidepressant, a mood stabilizer, and an antipsychotic. Not because she was psychotic or unstable, but because that combination of medications is a standard evidence-based approach to managing bipolar disorder. And the thing is, these aren't rare conditions. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, bipolar disorder affects roughly 2.8% of US adults every year. And as for a major depressive disorder, well, that number is even higher. Over 21 million adults in the US live with it. These are deeply human experiences, not fringe ones. So for people managing these illnesses, consistency matters. Medications help maintain balance, and when that balance is disrupted, things can shift quickly. For Elisa, that shift may have played a role in what happened next. In January of 2013, she planned a solo trip down the California coast, a change of scenery, a break from her studies, a reset. She started in San Diego, where she visited the San Diego Zoo, wandered bookstores, and chronicled small moments throughout her travels. You could tell that she was hoping this trip would help her feel more like herself again. She planned to head north through LA and up to Santa Cruz. She blogged all along the way, thoughtful posts about feeling stuck, hoping for clarity, trying to stay open to new experiences. In her bio at the top of her blog, there was a quote from Chuck Palahniuk: "You're always haunted by the idea you're wasting your life." And maybe that's what this trip was all along, her way of pushing back against that fear and trying to live deliberately. On January 26th, she arrived in Los Angeles and checked into the Cecil Hotel. When Elisa first arrived at the Cecil, she was placed in a shared hostel-styled room. But it wasn't long before things got tense. Her roommates reported odd behavior, notes left around the room, long stretches spent locked in the bathroom, and moments where she seemed paranoid. Elisa told others that she didn't feel safe and that someone might be watching her. Eventually, hotel staff moved her to a private room. She was supposed to check out on January 31st, and when she didn't and her family couldn't reach her, they reported her missing the next day. LAPD searched her room, no signs of a struggle. Her belongings, laptop, medications, clothes were still there neatly arranged, but her phone was gone. Search dogs were brought in, and they followed her scent through the building until it stopped at an emergency exit leading to the roof. Beyond that, nothing. Still, she hadn't completely disappeared. There were several confirmed sightings of Elisa on January 31st, the day she was supposed to leave. A hotel employee saw her on the property but didn't speak to her, and that same day, she was spotted at the Last Bookstore, a well-known spot in downtown LA. The manager, Katie Orphan, said Elisa seemed calm, even warm, thoughtfully picking out books to bring home to her family. And not long after that, she was gone. On February 6th, the LAPD released a missing persons bulletin. The next day, on February 7th, they held a press conference asking the public for help, but there was no movement. Days passed, then a week, until February 19th, when something strange started happening at the hotel. Mike and Sabina Baugh, a couple from England, had been staying at the Cecil for several days. For them, it was just a cheap hotel in the middle of downtown LA, nothing more, but something wasn't right. The water pressure in their room was weak, the temperature shifted from scalding to freezing with no warning, the tap water had a strange metallic taste. Still, they chalked it up to old plumbing. Until the morning of February 19th. That's when Sabina turned on the sink and froze. The water that came out was thick and black. Not cloudy, but dark as ink. Within moments, it faded to a rusty brown trickle. She called Mike in and they checked the shower. Same thing. Dark water, strange smell. And then the realization set in. They'd been drinking that water, bathing in it, and brushing their teeth with it. They weren't alone. More guests started reporting similar issues. Complaints poured in about foul-smelling, discolored water, and the hotel sent maintenance to investigate. They checked the plumbing, looked at the pipes, then they turned their attention to the rooftop water tanks. Now, Santiago Lopez had worked at the Cecil Hotel for years. He knew the building, its quirks, its shortcuts better than most. Water issues weren't unusual, but when complaints of low pressure, strange taste, and discolored water kept coming in, he was sent to check the rooftop tanks. So Lopez took the elevator to the 15th floor, climbed the stairs to the rooftop door. Normally, that door was alarmed, but that day it hadn't gone off. The only other way up was the fire escape, a narrow, outdoor staircase attached to the side of the building. So when he got to the roof, he walked over to the 4 large cylindrical tanks that supplied water to the hotel. He checked them one by one until finally he reached the last tank. It could hold about 1,000 gallons of water, but it was only about half full. He climbed the ladder attached to the tank, opened the heavy metal lid, and froze. There, just beneath the surface, floating face up, was the nude and bloated body of Elisa Lam. Lopez reported it immediately. Police arrived and confirmed what everyone had feared. This was the missing girl they'd been searching for. Her clothes and belongings, including her room key, were later found at the bottom of the tank. The discovery was horrifying and confusing. Initial reports disagreed on whether the hatch had been open or completely sealed shut when Elisa was found. Some claimed it was shut, which raised even more questions. That detail, whether the hatch was open or not, became just one of the many questions in this case that never got a straight answer. The autopsy was performed just days after Elisa was found, but the public wouldn't see it until months later in June. While everyone waited, police secured warrants for the hotel surveillance footage. And that's when they found the elevator video, the clip that would catapult Elisa's case into one of the most talked about internet mysteries of the decade. The footage was grainy, pulled from a hotel elevator camera. It showed the last known moments Elisa Lam was seen alive. The video's view is from the top corner of the elevator looking down. Now, to start, the elevator doors open. Elisa steps into the elevator and turns toward the control panel. She presses several buttons in quick succession and then waits. But nothing happens. The doors stay completely open. The elevator does not move. She leans forward, quickly peeking out into the hallway, first to the right, then to the left, like she's checking for someone. Then she darts back inside, pressing herself into the corner near the panel. It almost looks like she's hiding. A few seconds pass, she steps out again, hesitant, then back in, then out once more. Her pacing feels unsure, like she's deciding whether to leave or to stay. She keeps glancing down the hall like she's expecting someone to appear. At one point, she raises her arms above her head and drops them again, then rushes back inside the elevator. She starts pressing the buttons again, fast, like she's trying to get the elevator to respond. Still, nothing happens. She steps out once more and something shifts. Her body language changes. She begins moving her hands in slow, drifting motions. Her fingers spread and twist in ways that seem purposeful, maybe even symbolic, almost like she's interacting with someone invisible. And then she's gone, out of frame. A few seconds later, the elevator doors close and the footage ends. This footage is so unsettling. Several minutes pass and the elevator still doesn't budge. People later questioned why, whether the footage was edited, whether time had been cut, or whether someone just out of frame had been following her. The footage was released to the public on February 13th, and within hours, it was everywhere. Online forums, YouTube, news segments, everyone had theories. Some thought she was hiding from someone, others said it looked like a mental health crisis, and some believed it was something else otherworldly. One of the strangest things about the elevator video isn't what you see, it's what might be missing. I didn't notice it at first, but after diving deeper into this case, I came across speculation that the footage had been altered, slowed down. Experts have noted that the video runs at about 15 frames per second, but hotel surveillance typically runs at about 20 frames per second. And there's a stretch around the 24-minute mark where nearly a full minute of footage appears to be completely gone. Some think the speed was adjusted intentionally, maybe to smooth over the missing time. Others have pointed out that the timestamps are distorted and hard to read, possibly to keep viewers from noticing the gaps. There's also a 10-second block missing between 25:05 and 25:15. So the question becomes, what was taken out? And more importantly, who? Some people believe the hotel might have handed over the footage like that already edited, but I'm not sure I buy that. It's hard to imagine police accepting altered evidence, especially when they're working off of a search warrant. More likely, I think the LAPD made the decision to cut something from the video before releasing it to the public. And that still raises questions. Was there someone in the footage they didn't consider a suspect, someone they didn't want complicating the investigation? Or was it something else entirely, the kind of detail police sometimes hold back to protect the integrity of the case? During a press conference, police referenced another video as well, and this one from the hotel lobby, where Elisa is reportedly seen with two unidentified men. But that footage was never released, and according to one officer, the men handed her a box. She got into the elevator, and that was the last time they were ever seen. No other details were shared, not about who the men were, what was in the box, or why the footage wasn't ever made public. And it makes you wonder, could one of them have been in the elevator footage in a portion that was edited out? We don't know, but it's another loose thread in a case that's already full of them. After the video was released, it took off. Everyone had a theory. Online forums, YouTube, Reddit threads. The footage struck a nerve, and the speculation started immediately. The first theory is some thought Elisa might have been under the influence of drugs. The second theory is that something paranormal was going on. The third theory pointed to a mental health episode possibly linked to her bipolar disorder or a shift in medication. And of course, there's the fourth theory, those who believed she was the victim of foul play. But of course, there were no clear answers until June of that same year when her autopsy report was finally made public. The report said that Elisa's body showed moderate decomposition. There were no visible injuries aside from a small scrape on her knee, and her cause of death was ruled an accidental drowning with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. But a few details stood out. Her clothes were covered in a layer of fine sand-like material. Investigators said it resembled the loose gravel found on the hotel's rooftop. This led to speculation. Maybe she'd been crawling or even dragged before ending up in the tank. There was also blood pooling near her anus. Some wondered if that pointed to sexual assault, but the coroner didn't find any clear signs of trauma. Swabs were taken from her body, from under her fingernails, but it's unclear whether those samples were ever tested, which has left people with more questions than answers. Her toxicology report didn't offer much clarity either. Elisa had been prescribed several medications for bipolar disorder and depression, but only trace amounts were found in her system. That could mean she'd stopped taking them in the days leading up to her death, or maybe she wasn't taking them consistently. Either way, it pointed to a break in her usual routine, which may have triggered a serious episode. Then came the confusion around the autopsy itself. At first, her death was ruled an accidental drowning, but not long after, that ruling was actually changed to undetermined with no real explanation. And for a while, the case felt like it was stuck in limbo, like even investigators weren't sure how to classify what they'd found. And then quietly, the ruling flipped back to accidental drowning. No clear reason was ever given, no clarification offered, which only raised more questions. Was new evidence found? Was there outside pressure to close the case? Or was it just a clerical fix that no one bothered to explain? Whatever the reason, the back and forth definitely didn't help. And for people already following the case closely, it just confirmed what they suspected, that Elisa Lam's death still didn't make sense. So with no clear answers, the theories started to take on a life of their own, especially online. So let's take a step back and look at them, starting with the one that leans into the paranormal. The idea that Elisa may have crossed paths with something otherworldly isn't exactly new. The Cecil has long had a reputation for the strange and the dark, the murders, suicides, unexplained deaths. For some, Elisa wasn't just another guest, she was another victim of the building's energy. One of the theories that gained a lot of attention was tied to something called the elevator game, an urban legend that originated in South Korea and Japan. It's said that if you press a specific sequence of elevator buttons while alone, you can access another dimension. Partway through the sequence, a woman might enter the elevator, and the rule is simple. Don't speak to her. Don't look at her, because if you do, you might not come back. It sounds like an internet myth, but if you've seen the elevator footage, it's hard not to notice the similarities. Stories about the elevator game have floated around online for years. Most people chalk it up to urban legend, but some say they've tried it and experienced things they can't explain. One of the better known stories comes from someone who said they played the game in a high-rise in downtown Atlanta, just to prove to her boyfriend that it was nonsense. She followed the instructions exactly. Everything was fine until she got to the 5th floor. That's when a woman stepped into the elevator, and the rules say not to look, not to speak, but she did. At first, the woman seemed completely normal. Blonde hair, green eyes, freckles, but then she started talking, asking for help and saying there'd been an accident on that floor. The player stayed quiet, and that's when the woman's voice changed. She went from pleading to furious, screaming insults and then sobbing in this eerie, unnatural way. Not sad, just wrong. Like, it didn't sound human at all. Overwhelmed with fear and an unexplainable hatred, the player panics. She lashes out, grabbing the woman and slamming her head against the elevator doors over and over again. Blood splatters, but instead of reacting with pain, the woman starts laughing. And that's when the player realizes she's broken the rules. Not just by noticing the woman, but by engaging with her. The elevator finally reaches the first floor. The player tries to leave, but the woman blocks the exit, smiling. The doors slam shut and the elevator shoots upward at terrifying speed, stopping on the 10th floor. When the doors open again, everything looks normal. A sterile office floor, people going about their day. Confused, the player presses the buttons for the lobby and walks out, trying to brush it all off. But that night, something feels different. She wakes up in a building she doesn't recognize, standing in front of an elevator, the number 10 glowing above the doors. Outside the windows, the city is completely lifeless, still and drenched in a deep red light, and completely silent. The players rush back to the lobby, hoping the nightmare is over, and at first it seems like it is. Morning light, people going about their day, everything looks completely normal. But that illusion doesn't last, because the same thing happens the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. And no matter where they sleep, they wake up in the same lifeless building in the same city drenched in red. By the 6th night, the elevator stops working. They're forced to take the stairs, but the staircase keeps twisting, growing longer, looping back on itself. It never ends, and there is no escape. On the 10th night, the player sees her again, the blonde woman just standing there and watching. At that point, they know they're not getting out. The last thing they ever write down: do not play this game. It will be the end of you. The warnings about the elevator game are easy to shrug off. They sound like something straight out of an internet forum, but still, it's hard not to notice how closely Elisa's elevator footage mirrors the steps of that ritual. She presses multiple buttons, steps in and out. Her movements feel anxious and unsure, like she's trying to make a decision or maybe shake something off. And her hands, they move in this strange, almost searching way, like she's reacting to something just outside of our view. And then she's gone. And the elevator, which stayed open the entire time, finally closes. I know how easy it is to fall into the rabbit hole with stories like this, especially when they line up so closely with other accounts. And while I do believe in the paranormal, obviously that's what this podcast is literally built on, I don't know if that's the explanation I lean toward most in Elisa's case. That said, you won't ever catch me trying the elevator game myself. I'm totally good not knowing what's on the other side. Some chalk it up to coincidence, others point to her mental health, but for people who believe in the game, it's hard not to wonder if she was playing it, whether on purpose or not. Did she make it back, or did something else follow her through? Now, there's another strange paranormal connection worth mentioning, not because I think it explains what happened, but because the parallels are just really hard to ignore, especially if you believe in patterns or synchronicities. The 2002 horror film Dark Water tells the story of a mother and a daughter who move into a rundown apartment building. Strange things begin happening. The elevator malfunctions, the tap water turns black and foul-smelling, and eventually, the body of a young girl is discovered in the building's rooftop water tank. Sound familiar? The overlap between Elisa's case and the 2002 horror film Dark Water is hard to ignore. In both, there's the dark, foul-smelling water, the malfunctioning elevator, the discovery of a young woman's body in a rooftop water tank. In Dark Water, it's a little girl, and in real life, it's Elisa, found after guests at the Cecil complained about the tap water's taste, color, and pressure. The parallels don't mean the film caused what happened, but for some people, the resemblance feels more like a coincidence, almost like she stepped into a story that already existed. Whether that's just eerie timing or something we can't explain, it's one more reason this case continues to haunt people. It blurs the line between fiction and reality in a way that's hard to forget, and just when you think this case can't get any stranger, we hit the theory that still raises the most eyebrows, the one that asks plain and simple: what if Elisa Lam didn't die by accident? Okay, so we've talked about what might have been going on internally for Elisa and how the hotel's energy might have played a role, but some believe she wasn't alone in her final moments and that someone else was involved. The Cecil had a long history of crime, and at the time of Elisa's stay, at least 3 registered sex offenders were living there. It wasn't exactly the kind of place where you could just trust your neighbors, and there's that strange little detail that she was reportedly seen speaking with 2 unidentified men in the lobby shortly before she disappeared. Police never released that footage, no names, no follow-up, just a passing mention. Then there's the elevator footage. The version that was released has its own problems. It runs slower than standard surveillance, and several frames are clearly missing. There's speculation that nearly a full minute was edited out, possibly to conceal someone else on screen. Some believe it points to a hotel employee, someone who could have given her access to the roof or disabled the alarm. Others think it might have been one of those 2 men. Either way, the idea is the same. Elisa didn't go up there on her own. And not to mention, one of the biggest questions around this theory has to do with the water tank lid. Now, this is the detail that trips me up each and every single time I think about Elisa's case. Santiago Lopez, the maintenance worker who discovered Elisa, said the hatch was open when he found her. But early reports claimed the opposite, and that's important because the lid was heavy, around 20 pounds, not impossible to lift, but inside the tank, there'd be no way to get the leverage needed to close it from below. So if it was shut, someone else had to have done it. Her autopsy showed no clear signs of trauma, but there were details that raised red flags. It's never been confirmed whether her rape kit or fingernail swabs were ever tested, and let's not forget the sand-like material on her clothes. It matched the gravel found on the roof, leading some to wonder if she had crawled across it or if someone had dragged her. Now, the murder theory doesn't tie everything up neatly, but it does raise enough questions to keep the door wide open. And just when you think this case has reached its limit for strange, it takes yet another turn. Not supernatural this time, not true crime, but something scientific, and still just as bizarre. This next theory gets brought up a lot in Elisa's case, and at first glance it feels like a stretch, but the detail is real, and once you hear it, it's hard to ignore. For the record, I don't personally believe there's a connection here, but the timing, the overlap, it's strange enough to mention for sure. It's called the Lam-Elisa test, and yes, that's really what it's called. Lam, Lam, ELISA. It's a diagnostic test for tuberculosis, especially in immunocompromised patients. Weird enough on its own, but this test existed long before Elisa Lam ever went missing. And here's where things get even stranger. Right around the time Elisa disappeared in 2013, there was a tuberculosis outbreak in Skid Row, just a few blocks away from the Cecil Hotel. It impacted hundreds of unhoused residents and kicked off a serious public health response. So now you've got this oddly named test and a major outbreak happening in the same place at the same time as Elisa's disappearance. It's definitely enough to make people start connecting dots, even if we're not sure what they add up to. That overlap caught people's attention fast. A test with her exact name already existed. A tuberculosis outbreak broke out just blocks from the hotel, same time, same place. So naturally, questions followed. Was Elisa part of some kind of study? Could she have been exposed accidentally? Or, in the deeper corners of the internet, was her death a distraction, a cover for something bigger? Some even wondered if TB itself could have played a direct role. In rare cases, it can cause neurological symptoms, confusion, hallucinations, disorganized thinking. Could that explain the elevator footage? Possibly, but her autopsy showed no signs of infection, no TB, no record of testing, nothing to tie her to the outbreak at all. Still, the combination is definitely hard to ignore. The name, the timing, the proximity. It's one of those strange details that feels like it should mean something, even if we don't know what. And yet, for all of the coincidences and questions, the theory that seems to hold the most weight is also the most human, one that brings us back to Elisa herself. After all the speculation, the edits to the footage, the theories about foul play, the possibility of something darker, we come back to what many consider the most likely explanation, the one that feels the most grounded and the most tragic. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1, and her treatment depended on a careful balance of medications. But according to her toxicology report, only trace amounts were found in her system. That could mean she'd stopped taking them, or that she wasn't taking them consistently enough for them to be effective. Without that stability, she would have been vulnerable to all the things those medications help manage. Paranoia, disorganized thinking, hallucinations, impulsivity, and if she was already in a fragile state, the stress of traveling alone combined with the atmosphere at the Cecil might have pushed things too far. Some believe Elisa may have experienced a full-blown psychotic episode. In that state, she could have made her way to the roof, climbed into the tank, and sealed her own fate without fully understanding what she was doing. Others have pointed to a rare condition called paradoxal undressing, where someone suffering from hypothermia begins to feel intensely hot and starts removing their clothing. But even that part is debated. Would a rooftop water tank in Los Angeles get cold enough to trigger that kind of reaction? And then there's the lingering questions. How did she access the locked rooftop? If the hatch was truly closed when she was found, how could she have shut it from the inside? Why were her clothes removed? And why were they coated in that fine sand-like substance? The mental illness theory explains a lot, but not everything. It is, however, the most human answer and maybe the hardest to sit with because it doesn't offer certainty, just the weight of what might have been. But before we move forward, we have to sit with that because for all of the wild speculation and internet theories, the explanation that often feels closest to the truth is also the one that hurts the most. It's real and it's human. The theory that Elisa's death may have been the result of an untreated or poorly managed mental health crisis remains for so many the most likely and the most heartbreaking. For Elisa's parents, David and Yina Lam, this was the kind of loss you never come back from. They had built a life in Canada from the ground up, working hard to give their daughters every opportunity. Elisa was smart, thoughtful, deeply curious. She shared pieces of herself with friends, with strangers online, and most of all, with her family, always checking in, always connected, even when she was struggling. Mental illness was a part of her reality, but it never defined her. She was so much more than what happened at the end. Still trying to understand how this could have happened, Elisa's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel later that year. They believed that the hotel had a responsibility to keep guests safe, and that allowing Elisa access to a restricted, dangerous area was a clear failure. To them, this wasn't just a tragic accident, it was something that could have been prevented. The hotel argued otherwise, and they claimed the doors were locked, alarmed, and were working, and that Elisa's actions couldn't have been predicted. In 2015, the judge sided with the hotel, ruling that there was no direct evidence of negligence. It was another blow to a family already grieving, not just their daughter's death, but the way it was handled, explained, and picked apart by strangers. The case was closed, but the story wasn't, because long after the legal files were packed away, long after Elisa's name faded from headlines, the place where it all happened kept pulling people back in. Even after the case faded from the headlines, the Cecil didn't lose its grip on the public imagination. If anything, it became more infamous. The details of Elisa's case, combined with the hotel's long, unsettling history, created something people couldn't look away from. Not just another news story, but a symbol of something darker and harder to explain. In 2017, the Cecil shut its doors for renovations. 4 years later, it reopened, not as a hotel, but as permanent housing for low-income and unhoused residents. It was a step in a new direction, and a needed one at that. But the building still feels heavy with everything it's seen. The rooftop tanks are gone, the rooms are updated, the lobby has a fresh coat of paint, but the past doesn't leave that easily. And the name still pulls people in. Some say it's cursed, others call that dramatic, but either way, one thing's for sure. The story of Elisa Lam and the questions that still surround her death haven't been forgotten. Not by the people who knew her, and not by the ones who never even met her at all. Elisa Lam's case stays with people for a reason. It's not just the questions, though there are plenty. It's the way her story makes you stop and reconsider how we talk about mental health, how we treat people in crisis, and how easily someone can slip through the cracks. Whether her death was the result of a mental health episode or something more sinister, or a series of overlooked failures, what's clear is that Elisa mattered. Her life was more than the way it ended, and her story continues to resonate because people recognize something familiar in her. Someone thoughtful, curious, trying to reconnect with who they are. The Cecil's history added to the mythos, but at the heart of the story is a real person. And it's worth remembering that, especially when the theories start to spiral. But perhaps the most important takeaway from this case is not the mystery itself, but the awareness it has brought to mental health struggles. Too often, individuals battling invisible demons suffer in silence, and too often their struggles are misinterpreted or dismissed. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, you're not alone. There's help out there and people who care. If you're in crisis or just need someone to talk to, you can call or text the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988 or 1-800-273-TALK. You can also find international resources at www.befrienders.org. If you want to dig even deeper into Elisa's case, you can find all the sources, show notes, and extras on our website, darklyspeakingpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media at Darkly Speaking Podcast, and if you prefer to watch, full video episodes drop weekly on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being here and joining us for the very first episode of Darkly Speaking. To kick off our launch, we will actually be dropping one more episode before the end of the week, so don't forget to follow us on our social media to stay up to date on that. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week with a brand new episode.